This week, 3 simple suggestions for savers. We're at the start of 2016, so let's think about ways we can boost the amount that we save. So, what are we saving for? A quick reminder, very quick. We are saving basically over 3 periods. Now, people say to me this is a bit artificial. Yes, but it's really important that you structure your saving and invest according to when you might need the money back. So, over the short term, holidays, treats, yes, but more importantly, we do need that rainy day fund. 6 months of salary, let's say, set aside for emergencies, acts of God. People living in the north of England know all about that at the moment, and or redundancy, and or illness. That's important, but that's by no means the end of the story. That's the start of the story. What about the medium term? How are you going to pay for that house deposit? How are you going to pay for that wedding, whether yours or your children's? How are you going to pay for that new car? Now, just use a car as an example of a big asset that you might need to pay for. You've got to get some capital together to do that. And then there's the long term, not to be forgotten as the state cuts back the cost of children's education, retirement, and long-term care. And the costs of these rising all the time at a fairly frightening rate. So, saving is all about thinking about 3 periods. Now, in one video, let's just take 3 messages. My 3 suggestions in this video: don't sit on too much cash. Markets may be volatile, but nonetheless, be careful how much of your wealth you allocate to cash. Number 2, reinvest dividend income. Now, I'm not suggesting that the only 2 assets you can invest in are cash and equities, which you might be thinking from the fact I've just given those 2 points here. There are government IOUs, yes, they can be useful in the short and medium term, and there's property. But I've got to be honest, in other videos I deal with buy-to-let as an asset class. I would say its best days are behind it for the time being, and George Osborne is making it more and more difficult to make money from. So let's leave that to the professionals and the retail experts, let's say, and focus on ways to maximise the return from equities. And one way of doing that is to use up your 2015-2016 ISA allowance. Let's not hand over more than we need to the tax man. And if you combine these 2 together, you get a potentially quite powerful combination in terms of building your medium to long-term pot. Now, briefly then, what's wrong with cash? The International Monetary Fund, no less, not famous for getting its big economic predictions right, in my view, but nonetheless influential, says cash is a convenient medium of exchange. Yep, for stuff you want to get done now and in the future. Sure, getting transactions done. It's a useful unit of account. It's a way of keeping score. It's a way of pricing different items in one unit, if you like. But is it a store of value? In the short term, perhaps. In the long term, almost certainly not. And this is a message I've put out before, so I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle. I want to answer a question that I've been thrown by a few people saying, you keep going on about purchasing power, the fact that cash doesn't maintain your purchasing power. What do you mean? Well, hopefully this will sell it to those people who are not sure. Imagine you had £1 in 1985. All right, what would that buy you? Well, roughly, if you want to see it this way, roughly 3 loaves of sliced bread. Now, wouldn't even buy you 1. Right, you can question where I got the data from. It's a fairly reliable source, government statistics, but there's the point. That pound has lost loads and loads of purchasing power. Why? Because the price of the sliced loaf has gone up, and therefore inflation has done its work in terms of eroding what that pound will buy. It looks like the same pound. Take it out of your pocket in 1985, take it out of your pocket now. Same pound buys less. And that's what I mean by the erosion of your purchasing power. Carrots per kilo, 3 kilos, 35p each, let's call it, in 1985. Not so much now, okay? Diesel per litre, if you're into diesel, if that's what you need, 36p in 1985, £1.49 now. So you get the point. Your pound is not even buying a litre, whereas it bought several of them in 1985. Now, I could carry this on. Detached house, £45,200 then, £273,000 now. And we do believe in the idea of trying to own your own home. There are emotional and financial tax advantages to doing so, but look at the way that has moved. And cost of a pint of lager, something close to my heart, 73p then, £3.35 now, and in my local, quite a bit more than that. So, this is the point. What a pound would buy in 1985 is very different to what it will buy now. So when you hear me talk about the erosion of purchasing power, which is a rather grand expression, that's what I'm getting at. Okay, you want to see this another way. Supposing you had £100, all right, and you were looking at a 25-year period, and you were looking at 3 different rates of inflation, because you don't know what inflation is going to be. Inflation is the rate at which goods and services like carrots and bread are changing in price. But obviously, you know what's happened in the past, you don't know what's going to happen in the future. But imagine you had £100 being eroded over 25 years at 2% inflation, 5% and 10%, all right? So a kind of lowish rate, UK long-term average for, say, the past 50 years, roughly speaking, and quite a high rate. What would that look like? Over 25 years, just a 2% inflation rate. People thinking 2% is not much, is it? Just a 2% inflation rate reduces £100 to more like £60, all right? At 5%, it shreds it much, much further, and at 10%, you're down to a very, very small amount in purchasing power terms. So that's the kind of damage that inflation can do. And if you're thinking, well, at the moment, we haven't got much inflation, have we, so who's worrying? Well, just bear in mind that that is true. We are hovering around 0 at the moment, but that's unusual for the UK historically. Now, the past is no guide to the future, but nonetheless, we've seen much, much higher rates of inflation, and there are plenty of economists speculating that sooner or later we may see it return. So, food for thought there, there's number 1. Number 2, why reinvest income? Let's assume you're allocating a proportion of your money to shares, not cash. One way you can seriously dent the return you get from equities, and it does do it, and people are shocked by it, is to keep spending the income. Now, at a certain point, you may need to draw off income in retirement, for example, but in the meantime, make sure you reinvest it. I'll give you one example using the FTSE 100, the power of dividends. Now, let's again compare 1985 to now. Let's compare the FTSE 100 index, capital only, to the FTSE 100 total return. That's capital and reinvested dividends. How's it look? All right, well, these numbers won't mean much. These are the levels of the index then and now, okay, but the numbers I put up next will make it more obvious, the point I'm trying to make here. So the index has risen from about 1,412 to 6,305 on a capital-only basis. Between those points, on a total return basis, from 356 up to 4927. Lots of numbers. What am I trying to say? Well, here's the point. That's a 4.5 times increase on a capital-only basis compared to a 14 times increase on a total return basis. And the FTSE 100 is by no means the most impressive example of reinvested dividends at work. If I did this for the FTSE 250, that gap would be massive. If I did it for the FTSE All Share, it would be bigger. But the point I'm trying to make here is that reinvested dividends have a powerful effect on your overall total return. Worth remembering that. 3, why bother with an ISA? I'll be returning to this topic in more detail nearer to the end of the personal financial year, which ends on the 5th of April. But for now, why shelter investments than an ISA? Well, first of all, they're getting better and better and better. The government seems to like them. It keeps changing them in your favour. The annual allowance keeps rising per person. It's now a little over £15,000. You can switch your investments around between cash and shares, for example, and you can allocate them in any proportion you want up to the annual total each tax year. Withdrawals are allowed at any time. So unlike, say, a pension where you've got to think a bit more carefully about when you need the money back, with ISAs you can in theory take it out at any time, although if you do, you lose the ability to then take future tax benefits on the same capital. There's complete flexibility about how you allocate your money within the ISA, and these days a spouse can even inherit ISA tax advantages, which has only been the case relatively recently. Now, couple all that with the fact that you can put more and more things inside an ISA, a point I'll return to, and the flexibility is looking pretty good. In terms of ISA power, just to give you a quick reminder, if you were to put £1,000 monthly into an ISA, where would you be after 15 years at the FCA's considered sort of low rate of growth, a sort of middling rate of growth, and a high rate of growth, none of which are guaranteed, by the way, but just for illustration? Well, you'd have paid in £1,000 a month, okay, times 12, to give you a year, times 15, £180,000 in all 3 cases. But if you were to achieve tax-free growth, before charges, admittedly, but tax-free growth of 2%, 5% and 8%, how much would you add on top for effectively doing very little? The answer is a wee bit in the case of 2% growth, a decent chunk if you get 5%, and a substantial chunk if you manage to get 8% growth. Now, no one knows for sure which of those growth rates they'll achieve, but the point is the white stuff is more or less, I won't say for free exactly, there's no free lunches in financial markets, but compounding tax-free growth adds substantially to the value of your account, taking it to 210,000 on the left, 266 in the middle, and 340 on the right off a base of 180,000. Now, if you'd like to know more about all the points I've just made and some other tips to carry you through 2016, please do have a think about getting hold of a copy of my short financial fitness guides, one for the over 30s, one for the over 50s. If you're wondering where to get your free copy, it's the usual place, editor@killick.com.